Welcome to the Art of Healing podcast, the podcast that is dedicated to helping you connect with your mind, body, and spirit. This is Charlize, physician and Reiki master, and thank you so much for joining me. I would like to remind you that although I'm a physician, the information you receive in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. You can find my full disclaimer at my website, www.healingartshealthandwellness.com. If you like what you hear on this podcast, sign up for my weekly newsletter. Check your show notes for more information and for the link to sign up. Thank you. Hello, podcast listeners. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. I had been blessed to have a special guest on my show earlier this year. This is Dr. Seleena Smith. I had so much positive feedback from her show that I asked her to come back. And this episode is, in full disclosure for you listeners, due to time constraints and things, I record these episodes quite a bit in advance because I prepare them. I put in a lot of work to make them really special for you. But there's been a lot more traumatizing things to happen to us as a society. Well before many of the events that have occurred worldwide, planet-wide, I had asked Dr. Smith to come and educate us on sort of how to know when it's time to seek therapy, how to approach seeking therapy, and in particular, because she and I are both women of color, I wanted to address some of the barriers and how women of color might not see the benefits of seeking therapy. So to introduce her, Dr. Seleena Smith is a psychologist who has a very long practice background. She has practiced in a variety of settings, including for incarcerated individuals. She's practiced with veterans, and currently she has a practice which you can find her at realliberation.com. I know you're listening, so I'm going to spell that. It's RealLiberation.com, realliberation.com. You can also find Dr. Seleena Smith on Instagram at Real Liberation Coaching. You can find her on Twitter at Real Liberation Coaching and Consultation Services. And her handle on Facebook is Real Liberation Coaching. Dr. Seleena Smith has a practice that is virtual. It is worldwide. She can accept patients and clients from all over. And during this episode, I really wanted her to walk us through some of the anatomy and some of the basics of what it's like to seek therapy, what happens once you start therapy. In particular, for you listeners that may have wondered if you need to be working with a therapist, if this is something that would help you, if you're wondering if you have serious mental health issues that you need help with. I found over the years in my own practice that this is a topic people are often afraid to ask. So we'll just spend this podcast doing this. So thank you so much for joining me with Dr. Seleena Smith. Let's get started. All right, listeners. Well, here is Dr. Seleena Smith, who I am so honored has come back. She was a guest on my show on Valentine's Day, which is fantastic depending on where you are in your love life. I'm single. I was just single. Some of y'all were deeply in love or falling in love or falling out of love or divorced or whatever. But thank goodness Dr. Smith was there for all of us. And she left us with some sage wisdom on relationships. And the feedback and the response I've gotten from her episode have been amazing. So I'm so lucky that Dr. Smith is back. And Dr. Smith, thank you. May I call you Seleena?
Of course, please do. I'm glad to be back. Thank you so much for inviting me back, Dr. Davis, and giving me opportunity to talk to you again. I love talking to you. So
thank you. And please call me Charlize while we're on this podcast. I am her doctor, but
It might slip out.
call me Charlize. It's okay. Nothing's gonna break. So, Seleena has been so nice to come back. I wanted her to spend some time introducing herself and describing her background. She has a unique practice that I think is amazing and is the wave of the future. So I wanted her to share that with us. And then I also wanted her to help us know when, how, what happens when you seek out the help of a therapist, and just to walk us all through as humans how to do this. So, Seleena, tell us some about your background, if you don't mind, and just you.
Okay, so a little bit about myself. So I'm originally from Texas, San Marcos, which is outside of Austin. From high school, after I graduated, I went to Howard University, which is in Washington, D.C., and I received my bachelor's and master's degrees there. I always say going to Howard was one of the best decisions I could have ever made for my life. Like, I'm crazy about Howard. From there, I went to the University of Oklahoma and I received my PhD in counseling psychology. I worked in a variety of settings, such as community mental health. I've worked in the nonprofit sector. I've taught at universities here in Oklahoma. Worked in the women's prison and the VA system. And then also I worked at Prairie View University in Texas. So I've done a variety of different things. I feel like all stops have led me to where I am today. So they've all been amazing experiences. In addition, like that's my professional, and I'll talk about my business after. So I have a 3-year-old who is my world, who is my everything. And I enjoy being a mother. Like, it's one of the best things ever. I don't know what I was doing before I had her. Like, I was just walking in circles or something, just wandering aimlessly. So it's definitely been just one of the best things to ever happen to me. And the last thing, I started my own practice in August of 2021, and it's called Real Liberation Coaching and Counseling. That's not right. Coaching and Consultation Services. Sorry, this is my Friday brain. And so what that focuses on is just helping people actualize and achieve their dreams, their dream life, helping them with relationships. So REAL stands for Restore, Empower, Align, and Love. And I feel like all of those pieces are so important in our healing. And so I just help people heal and help them create the path to achieving their dreams and their goals in life. So that's been awesome. And then the last thing I do, I'm a part of a nonprofit called the Soul Care Collective. And what we do is we offer affordable mental health care to Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And so the providers all are Black, Brown, and Indigenous. It's often hard to find a practitioner who looks like you if you are a minority. And so it's just an awesome opportunity for people who may not have insurance or who have limited financial resources to still receive quality mental health care.
So that is, the REAL stands for, tell me one more time.
Restore,
empower,
align, love.
And love. It's a very goal-oriented practice, very mission-driven practice. Yeah. I love that. And then I also wanted to highlight for the listeners that what I love with Dr. Smith, and when I'm referring my own patients to her, is that she is everywhere because she's virtual.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's funny, I just forget to mention that because it feels so normal now, like in this post-COVID, well, not post, but we're in pandemic era. Yeah, everything is virtual now. So I can do individual coaching, relationship coaching, help with organizations, and kind of just helping with different aspects of just building morale and all of that. Yeah.
Oh, nice. nice. And I need to ask you too about the couples counseling part and relationship counseling. Oh my gosh. I am biased because I'm single. So I'm like, oh yeah, two people probably need help too. But a lot of the listeners are in some kind of relationship. So that's important for them. Good, bad. However, they're in something. So, and just so the listeners can understand, and I share with my patients too, do you perceive that being virtual has lost any impact in your care?
That's a good question because I was initially worried about that. My job at the VA, I was doing virtual sessions. And so that was the first time I ever had the experience of providing telemental health care. So I don't think I've lost anything because I've become a lot more in tune with just focusing on, just those slight shifts in, body language and facial expressions that help me like kind of guide my work. And so I don't feel like, in fact, I actually think it gives me a different perspective. So if people are coming to my office, I can't really see, what's around them. But when you're doing virtual, people are at home. And so I feel like even just looking in the background gives a lot of insight. Like, is your home dark? Is there clutter? Is there stuff around you? Like, how are you looking? How are you presenting? Are you disheveled? Is your hair done? Like all of that, And so it's actually giving me more data to help provide services and provide what my clients need.
So, one of the situations that I frequently encounter as a practicing physician when I'm with my patients is they're going to come in with because I'm internal medicine, so come in with a physical issue, and we do our due diligence and we discover that physically they're healthy. But the link is becoming pretty obvious that physical symptom is related to something else. And then we come to this sort of juncture where I have to say, have you ever considered therapy? And just from the end, and I think for like us, like frontline practitioners, we run against this all the time. You get the brick wall. You get the brick wall of like, no. And you get to that point where there could be a real shutdown. So I know I may be coming up against a trauma or something they're not wanting to face. So what in your wisdom for those people who may be working with a physician, maybe been to the emergency room 10 times with panic attacks, maybe severely depressed now, they're so depressed that they're listening to us in the bed in the dark and they have yet to seek help. What kind of wisdom light can you shed on like what the first steps would look like and how do we take some of that fear out of taking those first steps?
So first of all, I want to like acknowledge that seeking help is an act of courage. Like it takes a lot of courage and bravery and strength to even reach out. So I want to acknowledge that, like you're signing up to open up your life to someone that you don't know in a lot of ways. So what I would encourage people to do is take their time and look, search providers. One good resource is Psychology Today. They have therapists and life coaches from all, walks of life, all kinds of practices. Therapy for Black girls is another resource. And so they have, Black providers in different places all over the country. So using resources like that to like actually read profiles, like see how they are describing themselves and their work and find something that resonates, someone that it sounds like they resonate with you. You set up an initial consultation meeting with them and just fill them out. I feel like it's a lot like dating in some ways. You are going to try on different therapists until you find one that feels comfortable and feels safe and feels like they would be a good fit for you. You're trying to find a good fit ultimately.
So the first visit, and that's something I even need to tell my own patients, is the first visit, it's expected that this is like a meeting and sort of feeling each other out. It's not necessarily a commitment for a year of
No,
treatment or anything like that. You say, I
no.
need to remind my own patients of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way I do my first session, it's just basically I introduce myself, and tell them that this is just a conversation. You're checking me out to see if I'm, a good fit for you and what you're looking for and who you feel comfortable talking to. And so, I asked them to kind of tell me a little bit about themselves, just their family and what they do for a living. And then talk just a little bit, because I don't want anyone to open up about all of these things and then feel like I'm not a good fit and have to do it all over again. So, I provide a space for them to just tell me a little bit about what's going on in their world and what's bringing them to my office. And then after that, I spend time talking about myself. So I tell them a little bit about who I am and how I would approach the work that we would do together. And I pretty much stress that this is a collaborative process. So I want them to know that their voice is important, that I want them to feel empowered and affirmed in our work together. And I provide a space for them to ask questions. And that's pretty much how I do my initial meeting, just so they can, because a lot of times this is someone's first time like experiencing therapy, period, and so I don't want it to feel overwhelming. I want them to like just kind of get a feel for what the rhythm can feel like. And so that's a lot of what I do. Just give them an opportunity to meet me and fill me out and get to know how we will work together.
So how does someone know if they've never been to therapy before? How do they know when it's time to seek out a therapist?
So I think what we typically envision is that you were just in this place where, you're super depressed, you can't get out of bed, you're having panic attacks left and right. But that's not the case. Like, life is hard just in and of itself. And so we go through so many transitions and changes. And so I think that just helping you manage life is an important piece of like seeking therapy. So in addition to like the severe end of the spectrum, people who are depressed, if you have a hard time getting out of bed, you can't, maintain relationships, your appetite either increases or decreases, your sleep either increases or decreases, if you withdraw from people, a loss of interest in things that you loved doing in the past. Things like that can be signs, but also things like starting a new job or work environment stress can be a reason to seek therapy. I know what I did when I found out I was pregnant. I started therapy because motherhood was something new. And I know that motherhood can also bring up, old stuff that I experienced. So I wanted to make sure that I was in a good headspace to bring a child into the world. People often, if they're having problems in relationships, with dating, or even just family relationships, seek therapy, because ultimately, a lot of things come back to just relationships, anyways. An inability to have relationships or a history of having unhealthy relationships. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's underlying a lot of our pain and suffering. And so it can be, just things like that, starting school, if you're going to college, or any of those things, divorce, separation. Yeah, just life, and of course, grief and loss. So, death, or, I think about long-term illnesses, somewhere where you need support and a space to kind of vent and talk about things. I think those are good reasons to seek therapy. I always say that therapy is one of the best gifts you could ever give yourself. I always, because it's just so freeing. Like, it really helps you unlearn a lot of things that probably have not, or maybe at one point served you well, but no longer serve you well.
So I am going to quote several hundred of my patients. And if
Mhm.
this one is just too much, we can delete this question. But one of the common responses I get, and I'm going to I'm going to go there because we're both women of color.
Mhm.
One of the most common responses I get is, I
Mhm.
do not need therapy. I have the Lord and I pray.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't argue with that, of course,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Mhm.
But when I'm dealing with someone who may be on their second or third antidepressant,
Mhm.
and now we're combating side effects from the meds,
Yeah.
and in which I have to tell them, I don't actually have the skill to get beyond this.
Mhm.
I don't have any therapy training. So what's your response to that? I
Well,
know that's a big one, but that's what I hear is like, I don't need that because I pray.
huge. So I kind of asked, what's the difference between seeing you, right? Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
people are open to seeking like physical medical
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think it's just that stigma with mental health. Like, I'm not crazy. I don't need to talk to anyone. So again, it's a lot of unlearning stuff that, generationally has probably been passed down. So
Mhm.
that's my response, is that, just like you seek medical care for physical ailments, your mind, your brain,
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
emotional mental health is just as important. And perhaps not like attacking anybody's beliefs, but perhaps the Lord has put someone in your life to help you through those mental health challenges, just like the doctor, your medical provider is there for. Um, so that's how I think just trying to help debunk those myths about who seeks care and what even the purpose of mental health care is for.
So, whenever it's time to select a treatment, be it, medication or a referral or anything like that, one of my main duties is I have to weigh out risk versus benefits.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the most common reasons that people come to me as a patient, and I'm surprised in all my years of practice, it's the same, which will be anxiety and depression. It's the same that like dominate. They're often very open to prescriptions, which they're needed at times, and I prescribe them. They're needed. They're very open to that. But when I mention therapy, then there's a perceived risk. They perceive a risk that something's going to happen, and I
Mm-hmm.
gotta admit, and I've done therapy. I don't know what the risk would be. So, are there risks of receiving therapy that I'm not aware of? Are there certain risks? That I might be missing. Because when I'm working with, my own patients, although I can write a script, they'll take it and they don't ask me what the side effects are. As soon
Mm-hmm.
as I say therapy, it's like, what? Then I'm like, well, yeah, like, is there a side effect? I don't know that. So is that something that you often like have to advise, or do we anticipate like, I don't know, a side effect of some kind?
I mean, therapy doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good all the time.
Um,
With medication, you can take a pill and you feel better without any kind of real work, right?
okay.
Um, Therapy, you're kind of unpeeling those layers, things that you don't talk about, things you don't want to talk about, more than likely. Um, and so, yeah, I tell my clients in that first session when I meet with them, you may not feel good at the end of every session, especially if we're talking about some things that you've kind of tucked away and haven't allowed yourself to process or even think about. Uh, but what I do ask is that, hopefully at the end of every session, you feel a little lighter, like you kind of got something off your chest. So you have a little more space to deal with everything the world, throws at you. So I think that's what people want to avoid. It's hard being vulnerable. It's hard being vulnerable. And therapy requires you to be pretty naked in a lot of ways emotionally. Like, you're going through some deep stuff, and it's possibly going to make you question your outlook on the world and just, reflect on how you've moved around, in and about this world. for so many years. So it makes you reflect. It makes you look at your stuff. That stuff that you try to hide and you don't want to deal with.
Does that part get better as you work your way through the process, or?
Yes, because what you're doing as we talk through, let's say, just childhood experiences and relationship stuff with your parents, you learn a new way of being, So in some ways, it's like I'm the practice person, right? So you learn to slowly how to be vulnerable, how to have more authentic connections, starting with me. And then from there, you transfer that to other people in your life. And so you just experience a different quality of life overall. Your relationships are better. You may lose some relationships, but those relationships more than likely weren't serving you. They weren't healthy. And so a lot of that toxicity, will leave your life. Your life will become a lot more stable. But that process also can feel lonely at times because you're like, I'm feeling so much and assessing the people around you and even, just what you're doing for a living and all of those things, because, a lot of things have been planted in us like early on. This is what your career should look like. This is what your career path should look like. This is what your relationships should look like. This is what your faith should look like all of those things. And so you're deconstructing all of those things that have been taught and modeled for you. And that you're living a free life. You're who you were made to be and not what systemically or society tells you should be. That makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And really, thank you so much for walking us through that, because these are aspects of therapy I really didn't know. I know whenever I did therapy, I really didn't have too much fear about it. I embraced it, but I have definitely picked up just an intense, oh, I don't want to go through that. And it's hard to understand why. And probably too, because when I'm interacting with these people, it's already bad. So to me, I'm like, well, let's find a way out of this that isn't with me piling on more. And, so my, and I know that your practice, since you've opened up, I know that you are very busy now, in which with the listeners, I will definitely share her contact info. I'll share how you can find her. So I know that you're getting busier than ever, and especially in this time period, because so many people are seeking help because the pandemic and trauma from the pandemic and loss. One of the things that'll often happen when I'm treating someone for depression is we start a medication, and the physical signs of depression, we've gotten better. Fatigue's better. Appetite changes are better. Sleep's better. Then there's this gray space. There's this thing. There's like, we were down here. We got up to like the basics. These are better and you're surviving. And then they'll often tell me that there's this thing they're still not having. And so then I'm thinking, I think that's like happiness and joy, it going beyond. And that's when I'm like, oh boy, I don't know that this is how you get it, like with medications or with me. It sounds like in your practice, that's kind of where we push beyond that survival and go to the liberation. And
right, because the medication kind of gives you that boost, but then you've got to make changes in your life, because otherwise things are still the same, right? You're still at the same job. You're still hanging around the same people. You're still in the same relationship. Yeah. So it's just giving you that boost, but that boost is actually hopefully going to help you kind of kick some things into action if you're working toward making them.
I see. Okay. Now this is juicy. I didn't know this. Okay. So when I'm working with
you're so low that you can't make yourself. You can't find the energy. You can't find the strength on your own to do it. And so I feel like medication gives you that bump to be able to focus so that we can work.
Interesting. So, and for the listeners are, antidepressants, and many of us have heard of them. Many of us have been on them, but we have like the Lexapro, Wellbutrin, Paxil. These are the kind of medications we're discovering. So I'm actually learning so much from you. So once I do that prescription and I get them to like that next step, they're surviving. And so I think that's a win. We're good.
Mhm.
But what you're telling me is like that was just the beginning because
Mhm.
whatever led them to be so low.
Mhm.
Ooh.
Yeah, and so a lot of times I'll have
Ooh.
somebody who's not on medication, and we're talking about things in our sessions, and they're just unable to make any movement. Then I will tell them that they need to see a provider for medication because it
Okay.
sounds like there's something chemically going on at that point where they
Yeah.
can't make those moves.
Wow. Okay. I have to admit, I mean, that is a relief to hear. For so many of us that are primary care doctors, we're practicing a lot of psychiatry more than most. And I think you'll hear that from a lot of physicians around my age that we didn't anticipate we would do so much.
Mhm.
So it's so good to hear that, like, that's what they tell me. And I'll think, well, I know they need another step, but I'm not sure how to do it. So that's when it's probably time to see you.
hmm And I want to add something, Dr. Davis. We were talking about just that fear, about starting therapy. And I feel like um, it would be negligent of me to not bring up the cultural piece of it too.
Mhm. Please.
So, people have had experiences where they've felt like their experiences weren't validated or they were ignored or negated or, whatever, because of that cultural difference, right? And so sometimes having a provider who looks like you makes it feel a little safer. You don't have to explain the nuance stuff, right? You can just, there's a common language, oftentimes, common experiences where you don't have to name how everything impacts you because it's understood. And I think for a lot of people thinking about having to go through that with a provider who doesn't look like them, who doesn't, and
Mhm.
have to explain why they're upset because, someone touched their hair. Those nuanced things that we wouldn't have to tell another person who's been through it. So I think
Mhm.
that builds up a lot of fear and anxiety about, just giving it a try. That distrust and that fear of being misunderstood, mislabeled, like when these are like common cultural experiences.
So, you have shared an unbelievable number of resources during this episode. So, I want the listeners to know that I will make sure that you can get all of that because you've shared with us where you can find a therapist that's minority. You've shared with us even some cost effective ways to get treatment. And then, of course, how to find Dr. Seleena Smith. Dr. Smith, is there anything you'd want to close with or anything you'd want to wrap up with? And can you share with the listeners if they're, how to find you if you're okay with that?
Absolutely. I think the thing that I want people to leave at least thinking about is just the importance of having support, mental health support. Like life is hard. Life is not an easy journey. And you can't do it alone. You can't. And sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who is not related to you, who you don't have to see on a regular daily basis, um, to kind of process and talk through things. And so I just want to normalize like seeking help. We all need help. We cannot do this thing alone. And so give it a try. And even if you have a negative first experience, like don't give up. Like try another provider. Just like dating. Like if you go on a bad date, you don't have to do it again. You can jump back in the ring and try someone else, right? So I want people to think about therapy in that same way. Or just like if you have a doctor you don't mesh with or you feel like isn't listening, you try another doctor. So I want people to think of therapy and coaching and just getting mental health services in that same way. Because yeah, it just is so important. And a lot of people suffer in silence and that it doesn't have to be that way.
So, listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I will make sure that you are able to find Dr. Smith on social media and you'll be able to find her website.
All right.
I
asked me to do that. I'm so
No,
sorry.
no. I got it. Don't you worry about it. You're my guest. I'll take care of it. But yes, how do they find you?
Okay, so my website is realliberation.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then I mentioned the nonprofit that I work with. It's called the Soul Care Collective.
Okay.
On Instagram and Facebook, you can find me at Real Liberation Coaching. And I think that's all of my major things. I think Twitter, it might be Real Liberation Coaching 1.
For the listeners, I do have a weekly newsletter that I send out every week. I send out a summary of the show. I send you all the links. So if you're listening on the go, and I have a feeling you probably want to know some of those resources, you just let us know about, because I didn't even know about all of these. You'll want to sign up for my newsletter, because I'm going to be emailing out all the links that Dr. Smith mentioned. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Dr. Smith, thank you so much.
Thank you. I just love talking with you. Thank you for asking such excellent, thought-provoking questions and helping your listeners with this journey. Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
providing a space.
Listeners, I'll catch you soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Art of Healing podcast. Once again, this is Charlize. You can find out more about me at www.healingartshealthandwellness.com. Did you know I have a blog as well as online courses? Check your show notes to sign up for more information about healing arts, health, and wellness. Thank you. Please feel free to share this episode with your friends, family, and loved ones.